Good evening and welcome to Mr. Rajesh M. Iyer and the audience today who are viewing this through Vyam, the Desi app.
Yeah.
The book for today is Uncle Pai, the most popular uncle amongst the most reasonable people of the country. I can use both. And the book is written by Mr. Rajesh Iyer. Rajesh Iyer is a media professional. He has worked with Amar Chitrakatha, the publication which was founded by the magazine series, which was founded by Uncle Pai or Anant Pai. He is the author of two books for children, Nanba Nutcut, Tales of Little Krishna and Valiant Warriors, 5 novels, Evading the Shadows, a fictional spy thriller set during the Mahabharata. Wow. Hari and Friends, a holy adventure, a nostalgic coming of age story set in India of the 80s, Spinner of the Twisted Tale, a wondrous story of a storyteller's life, Karmic Souls, and of course, The Mind Whisperer. He lives in Mumbai and he has a website, interestingly, www.rajeshshmiper.com. Mr. Rajesh Iyer, I have very close friend called Santosh. He writes his name like you, Santosh.
Okay.
He's my childhood friend. So I was wondering if Rajesh will also write like this, and here is when Rajesh has written it.
So you finally got someone.
And what to say? The Amar Chitrakatha is something which is part of our soul, especially for people who are about 50 years old or who are above 40, or maybe people who are almost until 60. Between about the ages of say 40 and 60, the Amar Chitrakatha would have fed a lot of information. I will first begin with a small introduction of my own experiences with Amar Chitrakatha. I think I must have been about 5 or 6 years old, maybe max 6 years old. I was afflicted with the chicken pox. And once the chicken pox got worn out on the 7th day, they kept the pot of water in the hot sun and wait whatever heat that it could take. With that heat, I had a bath. And thereafter, my grandmother declared that I was fit to go out. And the first visit was to the Dandamariamman temple,
Okay, great.
which was on Avinashi Road in Coimbatore. Meanwhile, during my period of illness, somehow in my bedroom, there appeared the Amar Chitrakatha comic, the first comic, which was Krishna. I read that book and I understood that the Pandava princess was the other title which I shall seek.
Okay.
So when I went out with my parents, a small caveat, I told my father and mother that I want one comic. And that was perhaps the first request for a book ever made by me. So they were super thrilled and overjoyed. After this, they took me to the CLS bookshop, Christian Literary Society bookshop in Uplipalayam near the temple. Those days, they sold these books also. Not anymore. So I got this book. I took it back home and read it in one go. Then my father understood that it was difficult to handle me with books, got me about 7 or 8 of these books, and I started reading, and that's how I got glued into Amar Chitrakatha. Then I was wondering who is the founder of this magazine. Then I remember seeing this name IBH. I didn't know that Mr. GL Mirchandani and family were the owners at that time, or I didn't care much for that. And I was happy to read the easy illustrations and the sentences. And when I went and told my teachers in school, They were aghast. The language will get spoiled if you read comics. And I was like, I said, yeah, maybe. And I decided I will not tell them anymore that I read comics. That was the only way to solve that issue
Yeah.
and stop receiving comments. So I kept reading. And my mother decided that these loose books would get lost because, like Mr. Rajesh Iyer has said, that this Amar Chitra Katha was a famous treasure, that everyone was very possessive about the books that they owned and would not give it to anybody. And he says that the book will come back soiled or torn or with dog's ears, sometimes with a little bit of gravy on it also. And he says that the parents would have unsuccessfully, ironed it or washed it and dried it and whatnot. Amar Chitra Katha was perhaps the only book, according to Mr. Rajesh, which had undergone the treatment in an oven to a dosa tawa to a laundromat. It had gone through it all in an iron box also. Probably it got refrigerated too if it was too hot. So his narration is very interesting. First, I must say, he has done a very good job. Though he has worked with Amar Chitra Katha, he has not met Mr. Anant Pai. He has only met his wife, Lalita. And whenever people write biographies, they tend to be very kind. Or in the sense, it's not being kind or rude, but they are not objective. And here, I find the writing of Mr. Rajesh very objective.
Thank
He is
you.
very clear. He says, this man was a great man. He was made of phenomenal stuff, very hardworking, extremely committed, but also at the same time, he brings out the issues connected with Mr. Anant Pai and his team. Like if he would fight with them, or if he would get angry, or how would he react to a particular situation, and with people. Was he a larger than life personality or not? And was he a spendthrift or not? All this you should learn if you read this book. You'll learn if you read the book. We get to know about Mr. Subbarao. We get to know of the first few artists. Then we also get to know about Kamla, the lady who was in the editorial team, who had done a lot of work and finally she had to leave. Then he talks about the relationships that he's had with so many people. And interestingly, how he would market himself and how the magazine grew. All that is very interesting. I must definitely confess that about a dozen years back, somebody in Coimbatore were celebrating this Renuka Devi Utsavam, a set of agrarian Telugu speaking people from Andhra Pradesh, but migrated in Tamil Nadu 500 years ago. All popular industrialists, their Kuladevam or Kuladevata is Renuka. So there are several books connected with Renuka. But somebody said we want a nice book like a Reader's Digest. And it should not be written in one kind of, like a sing-song style. It should be a little easy and a little up-to-date. So they suggested get hold of Rajesh and ask him to write this. So the publisher came to me. He said, the chairman of the committee has suggested that you write a book on Renuka. I told him, Mr. Venkatesh, all I know is the spelling of Renuka and the story of Parasurama. And I cannot write Tamil. I did Hindi in school. I can only write in English. Please get a translator first and then we'll write. Then I told him, if I have to know more about Renuka, take me to the Renuka temple at Padavedu near Vellore in Tamil Nadu. It was hot summer. We went to Padavedu. I made notes and on coming back, I was wondering what to do. What storyline shall I take? You need a storyline for the book, right? So took the comic Amar Chitrakatha comic Parashurama.
Hmm.
Renuka is the mother of Parashurama. Therefore, I took that and used that. Of course, the information was much more. Somehow miraculously, in a matter of 4 days, I wrote something like in print as big as, little smaller than this book, about 60 pages in English.
Oh.
I really do not know how I managed that.
Hmm.
And I gave it to this gentleman and said, here, Mr. Venkatesh, take it to your translator. That is, he said, the translator is on maternity leave, sir. He said, what, a 65-year-old where on earth? Then he said, daughter is expecting, she's gone off to Bangalore. And somehow I managed to find somebody who began to translate it. He would call me often. Parashurama has had exterminated 21 generations of Kshatriyas. The extermination, how to do it in Tamil, sir. Then I said, where Aruthal is extermination. Somehow the book came out. ISBN code 20,000 books were printed, and full credit to Amar Chitrakatha. Because the base storyline, it's not about myself. The manner in which Amar Chitrakatha was gripping and how the storyline was brought out. Similarly, B.R. Chopra had probably felt the same way. His name is found here. So then slowly, I think Mr. Anant Pai became Uncle Pai and became more popular than Chacha Nehru or Mama Nehru. And for the youngsters of those days, if I was badly wanting to meet him while I was growing up. But, he was living in Bombay, we are living in Coimbatore, no WhatsApp, no Facebook, no Instagram, no mobile phone. That's all gone. I never thought of writing a letter to him. Then Tinkle came, and I had hundreds of copies of Amar Chitrakatha. Now, once I looked into Rajesh's book, I could understand the background of his story. There was, how Mr. Pai grew up, how Uncle Pai grew up. Was he fortunate while growing up, or was he unfortunate? How did he manage? I shudder to think what would happen to someone in today's world. The old Indian system was very, very good. Pai had lost his parents when he was 2 years old. He was brought up by his grandparents, and even they passed away. And then some cousins have brought him up. Imagine such a thing happening today. When people are leaving their own parents in old age homes, what will they do? This child will be in some orphanage or an old care or a daycare center. They will say, I'm busy, my life, my private life, I will not do all this. And finished.
That's true. That's true.
So I was thinking of all that. What a life, how difficult it must have been for this child to grow up. He and his sisters would have had to adjust with a lot of people, and has come up in a remarkable way with Bhagavad Gita as his guide. I must say, dear friends, even if I give you the whole story of Mr. Pai, I still feel that the book is a marvelous read. Because he has given pictures, he has given highlights, he has given explanatory notes. All that is very important when you read a biography. If you're reading a novel or some mythology or history, you may not need all this. The book has been designed well. The author has designed the inputs properly and given the highlights in a very efficient manner. And therefore, it is a pleasure to read the book first.
Thank you.
In fact, when I saw somebody's comment, they said there's nothing that the author has done other than what I already know about Anant Pai. I beg to differ. I think whoever it was would not have known so much. It would not have been possible. People are in a haste to react today. They very quickly, show off information. And I guess it starts from the fact that everyone thinks that they are the know-it-alls of the world. I knew that Anant Pai was an atheist or an agnostic, and that he did not have children, and that he lived for about 80 years or so. I was very upset when he passed away. I was in my early 40s, but still, I was Pi and Uncle Pi is an Uncle Pi.
Yeah, that's true.
So, Rajesh, from what I can understand, has worked with ACK, has done extensive research, has written other books also. But I want to know why, Mr. Rajesh, you wrote this book and why somebody else had not written it until you wrote. These are the first two questions for. In fact, when I spoke with somebody, they said, "What? Only 2021 is it? Pi died 10 years ago." These are people about whom during their lives only biographies will come out. Why no one wrote about him? And why did this writer and this media expert choose to write about him only? These are the questions that I have. And then, of course, we'll converse.
And let me begin by thanking you for wonderful words of appreciation for the book. Liking the book is perhaps the greatest, something that every author cherishes. So that's a great honor. I would start by answering your second question, which is a question to me, and I don't have an answer. But is the fact that why didn't anyone write about him? And that also saddens me, frankly speaking. The fact of the matter is, if you see in the book as well, in the post later on as well, there's a certain amount of lamentation that a man who did so much for this country's heritage is not being cherished. Had it been somewhere else, perhaps he would have been, for last so many years. It's high time that we actually start recognizing people who are looking into our heritage and bringing it out. Tell me anybody, any kid from a middle class background who grew up in 70s, 80s, 90s or afterward, who knew about Indian culture and heritage and about the epics and the great values from any other sources other than Amar Chitrakatha. Tell me about it. None. I've done my research. I grew up in that era. My friends grew up in that era. They didn't. For them, the only source, vital source, was Amar Chitrakatha. So the man who is done, saying that he has done human service is an understatement. He's done much more than that. He's kind of like created an entire thing of connecting. So going back to what he's actually baseline that he created, root to your roots. He's actually given us the root to our roots, which we were kind of like so disassociated with, enamored by the West, which we still are. I mean, to a very large extent, we still are. But he's one gentleman who has actually given us a platform which is to be so extremely proud of. Yet people have not written about it. In a way, saddens me. In a way, I'm thankful that I got an opportunity to write about him. So that way, I should be happy. Shouldn't be saddened by the fact that nobody wrote about it. Second part is, why did I write about him? That's basically an accidental thing. While I was in Amar Chitrakatha, even as a creative head, I joined Amar Chitrakatha after Mr. Pai passed away. So I didn't have the fortune of meeting him. And when my literary agent mooted this idea, the first question, in fact, in the author's note, I do write about that. The first question is, what is there to know about him? I know, everything is there in the public domain. Like the critic that you spoke about, I know where you're coming from. The critic, there's somebody who felt that all cut and paste. But it's the kind of research that's gone into it, only I know. The fact of the matter is, I also started with that. Oh, it's known. We've grown up knowing about Uncle Pai, letters and all. It's only and the second fact is, my own apprehension was I had left Amar Chitrakatha around that time. And the fact that much of his contemporaries were not around. So where would I research? It looked like an uphill task. But it's like all these things, serendipity, call it whatever it is, good luck, fortune, whatever. Things had to fall into place, they do. One thing led to another, things were happening. Then suddenly I spoke to some of our colleagues. There were a plethora. Suddenly there was a plethora. The entire relative, all his nieces, nephews, they all came together, almost rallied behind me. We said, wow, what a wonderful thing you're doing. Till that time, I realized it as a wonderful thing I'm doing. It's like, oh, I'm writing a biography. And then things started moving. One thing led to another. And so to answer your question straight, there was never a thought per se that I would be writing a biography. Had that thought been there while I was in Amar Chitrakatha, obviously things would have been much more better for the book, because I could have got documents from Mrs. Pai whenever she came visiting. Sadly, it didn't happen. But whatever it is, I mean, I think it's always for the good. So getting to your question is, it's just pure luck, chance that my literary agent, Sohail Mathur, I must name him here, and he insisted upon it. So I said, give me some time. Let me just talk to a few people. If there is enough material out there to be written and which is not there in the public domain, only then will I start. So once I had the kind of a story arc, the entire network, what I needed to get, I think things started rolling. So yes.
It is, because a very popular person, usually popular people are reasonably well known. Lots of facts connected with them are circulated amongst the people who like and dislike them.
Yeah.
And therefore, there is a very big challenge. You lived up to that challenge, because a lot of things connected with Uncle Pai that I know of. But yet I must say, it is much more than, I think, at least a dozen people who know very well about him.
I would just interject in one of the things, the first of these manuscript was actually when I wrote it, I passed this manuscript out to 3 of Uncle Pai's protege, who's still with Amar Chitrakatha. And these people are being groomed by them. So I said, can you actually find, because even though you started having association late 80s and 90s, and my story kind of ends there, but can you see the Uncle Pai you knew? And one of them, I still cherish those, messages and all. So this lady, I wouldn't name per se, who it is, but one of them wrote back, said, whenever the book, whoever publishes, I don't know, thank you for writing this. I said, wow, you made my day. So I know there is a validation from there. And there's a validation also later on came from people like Subbarao, who were actually part of that, the entire generation. And he was, and Miss Luis Fernandez. But very important that I name them is because they were the one who actually created Tinkle and Amar Chitrakatha, and those heydays of ACK and Tinkle. Both of them said, you transported us back to that. Yet, the greatest compliment was when Mr. Subbarao told me, they said, I knew these things perhaps heard, but I wasn't sure about them. I confirmed it after your book gave the confirmation. So I'm thankful that you wrote the book. I said, wow, it is. These are validation that you're looking for. So yes, I mean, obviously big bats will come, which we should be very, accommodative about. People might like it, not accept the way you write it, or, so that's part of the entire process. So, but overall, I think there's been a very, very genuine and warm response to this entire thing.
I'm sure it was. And also, most interestingly, Mr. Rajesh, what is the, more to say, Pai himself was very particular about the documentation connected with each of the comics.
Exactly.
I understand that some of the authors and the editorial people he had differed with. I am into this kind of activity, but not a comic person. I manage this www.theverandahclub.com, where we publish a lot of articles. If I look at a Mahabharata, I will only look at the original version. And if I have to, the English translation, Rimon Ganguly, KMG, or Vivek Roy, or somebody like this. Ramayana is, if it is Ramayana, it is Valmiki Ramayana. Otherwise, it will be called Kamba Ramayana or Ramcharitmanas. And if it is a story connected with the Harivamsa, it will be mentioned. So, retold from Harivamsa.
Exactly.
Then, from Nagananda, Ratnavali. It will be written if it is from Harsha Charita or Bana's, work. And interestingly, most recently, I was, a book which I think it came later, or I don't know when it came, was Madhvacharya. The comic Madhvacharya, Rajesh must be knowing, because you were associated with Amar Chitrakatha, so in a better position. So when I
Madhu,
took
yeah. Hmm.
Madhvacharya,
Yeah. I know, but the comic book came, I think, much earlier than.
much earlier, but I got to see it a little later only.
Okay. Hmm.
At which point of time I had written, or rather, I think I read it, but I had not bothered to see who the original author of the text was.
Hmm.
I personally know the family of Dr. B.N.K. Sharma.
Hmm.
He's from Coimbatore. His son S.K. Bhavani lives in Mumbai.
Hmm.
When I opened Madhvacharya, after many years, I saw the name of B.N.K. Sharma.
Hmm.
B.N.K. Sharma is the world renowned person connected with the life of Madhvacharya and Dvaita philosophy. And he is a winner of the Sahitya Academy Award.
Hmm.
There can be no greater person than him.
Yeah.
Text from B.N.K. Sharma has been adapted to make this comic.
Comic. Yeah.
Fantastic. For each one, even though they were very interesting, creative people, finally, I suppose the steadfastness of Pai,
Hmm.
he was like, very, he was the chaste person
Hmm.
who was attached to Indian mythology and epics
Hmm.
in the most honest and sincere manner that can ever be possible.
That
He
is
did
true.
not smear even little bit this side or that side.
That is true. But yeah, exactly. I would concur with that. Yes. Is the fact also is that he was, like you said, meticulous. He was so fastidious about getting things right. I mean, it's always open for discussion. All these things, when you open up, when people come for criticism, there's one kind of, I always say, why even while writing, there's something that has been taught to me very early in my life when I started out as a writer. Somebody told me not to become an armchair writer or an armchair critic. It's very, it's so easy, We sit in our air-conditioned rooms and suddenly we say, "Oh, this is not right. This is not how it is." Have they actually gone into it or not? It's so important, despite all these things. So getting back to Mr. Pai's thing, he has taken divergent views about certain, in all these things. Obviously there are differences, like I did mention about the differences he had with Kamala Chandrakant later in the day, regarding how Draupadi should be depicted. But those are perceptions. Those are the way you look at things. That's the beauty of, I think, Indian storytelling is. I think one of the reasons I keep harping about it is because for 5,000, 10,000 years, these stories are still alive and kicking in this country, and nowhere in the world, mind you, nowhere in the world, all of them are deadwood. When you talk about the Greek legends or anything, they're all like taken out of, cobwebs. Ours is still alive. Hindi, they have the word called Jivant, still throbbing with life. Why is Mahabharata still throbbing with life? It is predominantly because we put our heart and soul into it. So that there is always this friction of, going off key and suddenly not getting into that track. But I think that's what our greatness is. That's where it's been accepted for thousands of years. I think that's where Pi comes in as a great thing, even in that day, he's actually taken people opinion. Like I did mention, I don't know if you remember the first, you did mention about Krishna. The
Yes,
entire Krishna book goes against the tenets of his own belief. He never
correct.
believed in that miracles. But he went by the popular perception. This is a story that's been told and accepted. It's not that I should be telling my story. He did start with that, and then he realized that it is there. So that these are things, I think we must appreciate a man who's actually, call him whatever you may, but the fact that he accepts, yes, I will take a step back, Anant Pai will take a step back, and the story has to take a step forward. That's something, as a storyteller, every storyteller must understand that. So that's what I draw
I
from
think
this.
that's the right point, because he stepped back to let the story take the front
Exactly.
page.
Exactly. That's most important. And it's not just in that story alone. There are stories galore after that. There are certain things which obviously one book cannot mention, but there were differences with the editorial team, with the research team as well. This is not what I accept. this looks like a man, oh, he was rigid and he had his ego in place. He stepped back and many times did that. Obviously, he has to put his foot down because he's created his baby and there are certain things, that's where he envisions much more than other people did. Say right or wrong is a very relative term, we can discuss it and debate it till cows come home. But the fact of the matter is, he had something much more associated with Amar Chitrakatha than just a business. For him, it was not a business. It was much more than that. It was not just an enterprise or a brand he created. We are looking at from a brand point of view, as a marketing point of view, as a entity he created, as storytelling platform. All these are part, but it's a much more a cosmos that he created for himself. And that cosmos, he put a life breath into it. So you got to understand when he, we do that all the time. I do it all the time. When I've been an editor for 25 years, but when somebody touches my book, I go driving mad. I said, what the hell? I mean, this is where I'm coming from. I'm sorry. I mean, that's my viewpoint. I mean, can you just tone it down to some levels and get it down to get to the middle part? It happens with everyone. So not that I'm justifying whatever it is or trying to take a stand or anything, but the fact of it, we had to understand that despite all these things, despite his stands and everything, he's created a cosmos, he's created a universe which nobody did. The biggest monoliths didn't, the biggest publishing houses didn't, biggest media house didn't. The people, a lot of them who actually started out similar to him, it's not that Amar Chitrakatha was the only one talking about these. There were comic books. I do mention about a few names there. I don't want to take a lot of them, they came another, what happened? Couldn't they do the research? The research material was available, researchers were available, the stories are available. What happens? It's that fine thin line that people fail to realize. There's something that storytelling goes beyond mind. Is that hard domain where Uncle Pai put his heart into it and soul into it. Rather, let me just put it heart and soul into it. That's what makes Amar Chitrakatha so great. So I always feel, and that's what made me realize is why is it? I mean, it's still resonating with the generation today as well. All my relatives abroad keep buying and realize, and it's not that they're pushing it into the younger ones. The younger ones are accepting it. Mind you, there are two things to it. One is the elders pushing it because they say, oh, we grew up reading Amar Chitrakatha, let the kid also know about our culture through Amar Chitrakatha. That is, of course, the start process. But how do you make a kid of, let's say, 7-year-old, 8-year-old in, let's say, Seattle in the US or London or anywhere in the world, except that he or she goes on to read the 400 titles. You can't force 400 titles on a little kid. Let's be very clear about it. There is something there that resonates what Uncle Pai created and thought about way back in 1960s. Again, we got to understand this entire thing. It's not easy for a brand. Let's say from a marketing point of view, if you understand, no brand is so easy to survive for 50 years without changing anything. Mind you, that 50-year-old Amar Chitrakatha still works with the new generation. That's something you have to realize, and that's where that greatness of that man lies. So I think it's like I said.
Very, as I can definitely say, even the translations did well, because I remember buying somebody sponsored 1,000 copies of Tamil Amar Chitrakatha about 7-8 years before, and we managed to get it at a very good price.
Okay,
and the purpose was to distribute it in the places where English was not so well known, in the economically backward parts of the Coimbatore city.
Okay.
So I think, if I don't remember, I think totally it was 1,000 copies, but 25 titles. So we made sets, 40 sets of 25 titles each, and tied it up. And I started distributing it in a street parallel to the Big Bazaar Street and Vaishal Street, where people from the financially depressed and socially depressed classes lived. And the book was a big success, and somebody found out that it was there with me. And therefore, they would often come, take one set and go. I would only ensure that it was taking place well.
Mm.
So the distribution went on well. Then after some time, there was one of the elections took place,
Mm.
and a candidate from a particular political party started climbing.
Mm.
They said, Rajesh, these books going into that region has added to the vote bank.
Mm.
I was quite surprised.
Mm.
And you know, that accusation is held on Uncle Pai as well.
Yeah,
That,
yeah.
you know, they said you bought all these books and distributed it there. You had perhaps, you know, you had friends from a particular party, say the BJP or the RSS,
Yeah,
who
yeah.
sold the books to you for distribution. I said,
There
no,
is.
Chitrakatha titles, and not all of them were Hindu titles. There was Noor Jahan, Sultana Razia, and all in that.
Which is,
But
yeah, I mean, there's even a paper by a so-called scholar who said, RSS sponsored it. I don't know where RSS sponsored it, because he always fell short of money to market
absolutely.
it. You know, so this is, but then, like we were discussing it earlier, I mean,
No, it is the impression that it makes. You know, we had a nice tape recorder at home those days. I must definitely be on record for this. If I'm not mistaken, the book was Baladitya and Yashodharma,
okay.
one of the comics. It must have been 12, 13, 14, not even so much, maybe even a little earlier. I remember, you know, placing this tape recorder, putting a cassette inside, and I read the comic out with the, you know, with intonation and recorded it fully. And then, you know, as we grow up, we forget all this. You know, I still remember Huna Huna, and you know, Kill Kill. This comes in that book.
Yeah.
I have an uncle who's still there, father's youngest brother, who's mentally retarded. He somehow managed to take this cassette and keep, because this had my voice. He does not know that it is Amar Chitra Katha. After some years, just before all these cassettes went out of fashion, I was grown up and all that. One day I go into that house where I was living. You know, I heard my own voice being played. I thought, oh my God, what is this? It looks like my voice, and what the hell? It looks like some dialogue. Then his uncle had switched it on, and my grandmother was telling me I'd left that house and gone to live with my parents. So my uncle was perhaps missing me. He took this Amar Chitra Katha cassette and he would put it inside whenever he felt like listening and switch it on. And this Baladitya Yashodharma would play. So everybody in that house, at least, you know, they could remember some of the dialogues by heart.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of impact that this had on kids. And I must also say, I think there was a corner for pen friends in Tinkle, right?
Yes.
Where pen friend addresses in Tinkle.
Yeah. Whole lot. I mean, he did the.
I think the first pen friend whom I wrote a letter to was with an address from Tinkle, and that was also on Rajesh only.
Okay.
So I remember getting a letter, and I somehow lost contact with that gentleman. He must be also now. This was in the summer of '81.
Oh.
When we were all holidaying in Ooty. Tinkle is, I think, 1980 or something.
1980. Yeah.
So, and I think I also managed through one of these magazines to get a Scandinavian pen friend to whom I used to communicate for some time, and then somehow lost contact. So there's so many very interesting things. Now pen friend is a lost thing because of Facebook, Instagram, and other mediums. We get people by the thousands. So, why can't a movie or a series be made out of the story of Anant Pai based on this book? Is that possible?
It is already done. I think we are not connected on Facebook, so I'll share this. The film or audiovisual rights have already been bought by a film producer in Bombay.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, so hopefully at the earliest we'll see something turning up, because it needs to go to a larger audience. His thing needs to go to a larger audience, and people need to actually, when you look at the West, you know, again coming back to, you know, there are times they make heroes out of just about no one, and it's the kind of marketing that they do. And here are these heroes who, for sadly, we have not done. I mean, I think we are all partly to be blamed. Forget about official authorities sitting in the chairs. Not that. it's us as well. Have we done enough for them? So I think it's time that we recognize one among them being Uncle Pai. No matter what I always keep saying that. So there are people I talk to. I said, no matter what your political leanings could be, the fact of the matter is this gentleman brought ancient Indian stories. Forget about even telling you about culture and all. At least he was a storyteller. You do recognize of greater value. Why don't we actually give him that platform? We have not given him. It's almost lost into oblivion, except for the name and people who grew up in that era. This era, even if you read Amar Chitrakatha, they don't know much about Uncle Pai. Amar Chitrakatha is doing ACK is, of course, they're actively promoting a whole lot of things. But I think it still needs a little bit of a flip. And I do hope it happens with kickstarts with this book and a government recognition as well. I've written to the PMO as well, written to organizations, but things are not moved as it. Let's see how it does. But I think he needs to be given a government recognition as well. That's again from this.
I can definitely say India's highest civilian award can be given to him.
He did try about that. In fact, even if not Bharat Ratna, ideally he should be. I feel that he deserves that kind of thing. But
that can be the best way that the award itself will become valuable.
It should be. It should be. If we can, do it for politicians, do it for everyone. Why can't we do it for somebody?
No, they've given it to Mr. J.R.D. Tata, Lata Mangeshkar, M.S. Subbulakshmi. In line with that, I think they can give it to Anand Pai also.
Time we did that. So I've written, perhaps after this conversation, and we can collectively again start it and the process.
Maybe through one of these change.org kind of things.
We did that with change.org. I think there were a lot, even Amar Chitrakatha on their own, they tried a couple of times a few years ago. Things didn't work out that well. So I think we got to keep trying. So
absolutely, like how Uncle Pai kept trying.
Yes, why? It took him years to come out with even the first issue. Forget about the success. Success came much later. So I think we got to keep trying. So yes,
absolutely. When we look at stories like Jasma of the Odes, for folktale from Gujarat, beautiful story.
Yeah. So many stories. I didn't know about the kind of connect that he had. Did people in other parts of India know about our homes from the Assam, from other places? It is only through him that we came to know. 400 titles were not only dedicated to a certain section. It came from every nook and corner of this country. And that's something that is that's commendable. Look at that. I have done, as an editor, as a chief editor, over the years, I've done these editorial plannings and all. Trust me, this is not easy when you look back and put yourself in his shoes and say, we got to do that. The amount of research, and especially the fastidious research that he is so particular about, to make sure that you get the right people, get the costume right, the illustration proper, all these things to put together. It's not easy. It's seriously not easy. It's not, comic book is not a kid stuff. Creating comic book is definitely not.
Maybe kids are reading, for example, the Ashoka, that little ball-like thing on the turban.
Yes.
In here and there, I've always wondered, why did ACK come up with this ball-like thing on the turban? In the story of Ashoka, I got the answer from the book.
In the book. I have that is there. From the book that he actually, in fact, so there's a research book, that he actually fell fall back to. That was his research. And there's exhaustive research that's gone to. Especially, I must mention Kamala Chandrakant here. She did exhaustive research as an editor, as a writer, and she'll be there, amount of time that she spent at libraries and going to people and talking to them. It's amazing that the kind of work that's gone into it. I didn't realize it even while I was there in Amar Chitrakatha. It was only while I was researching this. Gosh, you tend to realize that, and to think you're coming up with the, fortnight after fortnight, a month after month, year after year, books after books. We're not talking about 1, 2, 20 books. We're talking about 400, 600 titles. So it is
Easy, more than 500 or 600, I think.
600 plus. Most of them are not available right now. Some of them have gone. Some of them, even IBH kind of. So when IBH was sold later on and it became ACK Media, some of the titles were lost. So all these things have happened. The transition's been a long haul, and the fire that happened. I'm sure we do talk about that fire and that.
Absolutely, the fire was something which I was quite shocked. How such a thing could possibly take place.
Exactly, it gives goosebumps to, and the fact that two of these people who are still working in Amar Chitrakatha, Savio, I must mention Savio and Reena. Reena is the executive editor of Times, executive editor of Amar Chitrakatha, and Savio Maskanas is the art director who's been there. So both of them are protege, and both of Mr. Pai, and both of them were there that fateful day. When it happened at night, next morning, the kind of devastation they saw. And why I started the story from there is, again, because it shows the indomitable will this man had. It's a downhill. People who have not read the book, and if they're listening to this, I'll just give a brief idea. When this fire actually happened in the early 90s, it was complete downhill for everything. Children publishing was going down, and things. Amar Chitrakatha was not new. Amar Chitrakatha was not coming. IBH had second thoughts about everything. Then the fire happened. Can you believe that? To come back, bounce back after that is not an easy thing. So this man, hats off to him. So whatever.
He was 65 years old by that time.
Exactly, that too.
And
that too.
Not, yes. An age where people want to retire to the hills.
Exactly. He could have hung his boots. He could have said, "Okay, done. There's enough laurels that I've earned over the years." He didn't. So, and that speaks volumes about that.
Absolutely. In fact, on the Sringeri Jyeshta Mahasannidhanam, Abhinav Vidyatirtha Swamigalu, when I wanted to read about him, I only took the Amar Chitrakatha.
Yeah.
Again. And then I used that storyline. Then I did a small write-up for his centenary year.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I took inputs from that comic as well, and did an article for one of the publications.
Oh. Wow.
So that much that we rely on the information which is put in Amar Chitrakatha.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that more than just being a biographer, that you have been associated with the magazine as well, and have been lucky enough to at least meet his wife, Mrs. Lalita Pai.
Yeah, that of course is there. So while we're talking about there are Western scholars who acknowledge this fact. In entire 90s, when they started doing research about when the entire floodgate of research started, on Indian culture and legends and epics and all, the first thing all Western scholars did was turn to Amar Chitrakatha. Everyone. And that included Mikhail Gorbachev also. Gorbachev, of course, asked for a translation. The first thing, since Russia is in news these days, that includes people like Wendy Doniger.
Yeah.
You might criticize us, anything, whatever she does. Can she deny the fact? She didn't. But she was, she wrote back and said, my son knew about Indian culture through Amar Chitrakatha. She wrote back.
Wendy Doniger. In fact, the book, I think, on the Hindus as to say so. And when there were people who wanted to pulp the book and they were angry, a few of us said, "You first read the book. There are so many factual errors, and on that basis only that book is not worthy of a read." Here he's brought in, for example, he cannot be accused. He's brought in a bishop to release the book on Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it are so many things.
In fact, he has not brought any Hindu pontiff to release any of the Hindu books.
Yes, he didn't do that.
You cannot accuse him. So I think it was very unfair.
Nobody can actually blame him. I mean, how do you blame him? He was an avowed atheist. So that is how it is. I think the greatness about our culture is that we we encompass everything, and that's what this greatness of this man is. When you, and especially I realized by researching is you realize that again, like coming back to what I said, he took the back step. Obviously, there's whole lot of things people might criticize. Oh, too much of Uncle Pai's can be seen. His thought process can be seen in the book. It happens with everyone. I mean, how do you take your mind away from it? You know, that you are conditioned in a certain way, and that's how you think. But despite that, you're able to pull yourself back and let the story take the front. It's not easy. Time and again, I said that a few minutes ago. I'm repeating that. He's done that so many times, not just in the Krishna book, but in other books as well, which some of them didn't find a part in the biography because of...
Like you look at the comic Aniruddha, Aniruddha has been carried in the sky. That would have been much against the thought process of Uncle Pai.
I didn't believe in any of that. Obviously,
you look at Prabhavati, you look at Bhanumati, you look at Pradyumna. I can name numerous titles.
Exactly.
Where there's so much of extraterrestrial, supernatural activities going on.
Happening, and he put there. So how do you not deny that? Not give him the credit. It seriously doesn't. I don't understand that. So anyway, so
in fact, when I had read the Rani of Jhansi, and then in school it's part of our non-detail and in Hindi, Mai Apni Jhansi Nahi Dungi and all that. And then later, I read this book by Vishnu Bhatt Godse ji, Travails of 1857. Somebody who had seen and met and spoken with Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi. He had written a book which was released only in 1911. And then the translation and all came out, and an authentic translation. The description of Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi, as found in Vishnu Bhatt Godse ji, fits very well with what is found in the Amar Chitra Katha comic. A person who had seen Lakshmibai.
Exactly.
So it's like, the whole circle in the last 35, 40 years that I have gone through, anywhere that you go, the authentic part comes out here.
Yeah, it is. Amar Chitra is done. They've done exhaustive research on it. So pan them without even thinking, and with your some people are doing with their political ideology. It's ridiculous. I mean,
I think they're only wasting their time and the time of others by doing so. Because if anybody reads just 2 comics, they will be very convinced. And that's not going to sell. And also calling him racist because he showed the demons in dark color. I personally think, the personality of a person is more important whether they're dark or fair. And why should somebody always think that when something dark is there, it is racist? Krishna was dark, Rama was dark, and no one bothered about it. Parvati and Meenakshi were dark. And even with regard to Kannagi, I'm glad that you pointed out the comment where Kannagi and Padmini were compared by somebody who was criticizing. Kannagi looks absolutely South Indian. The comic Kannagi with the anklet in their hand, and the manner in which Padmini walks into the fire, Jauhar. And often people misplace Jauhar and Sati. They don't know the difference between the two. And before that, they're shooting off.
Why you're talking about color? I mean, I don't understand this. I think we've gone through that's a different debate altogether. This is, but the fact is, Draupadi. To me, I'm a lover of Mahabharata. To me, Draupadi is a character which I like. To me, I think Vyasa has done. It's amazing. I mean, it's not even multidimensional. I don't know how many dimensions it has. Whichever way you look at it. Draupadi is the most beautiful character. If you look as a character, look at as a person or whatever. Most beautiful. There's no denying that. Draupadi is not fair. Draupadi is dark.
Krishna.
Her name is Krishna. So she's dark. Not just like half dark or semi-wheatish. Nothing. Dark. As in dark. So there was a time that we accepted. And like you said, Krishna.
She was the most sought after bride in the Mahabharata.
Yeah, not just sought after, and very intelligent woman. Very intelligent woman. I mean, anyway, that's something that I'll come. I am not speaking about that right now. One of my forthcoming books will be part of that. So Mahabharata, obviously, like I said, keep saying it's my love, or keep going back to Mahabharata again and again. So so these criticisms will come. They fly here, and which is part of life. I mean, we must take it with pinch of salt. That's all.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And I must definitely say that, looking at the world of today, where they give a color for every word and every alphabet, every dot and every crossing of the T, it's quite a challenge to write a book about a man who showcased Indian culture to the world through his comics. And if you write this book and with your surname and knowing the background of Mr. Pai, it's a very difficult thing. Today, the so-called liberals would never like to leave anybody in peace. The liberals are very orthodox. And the orthodox liberals, it's kind of an oxymoron when you put both these things together.
Live in that world, which is an oxymoron itself. Yeah, so I was discussing with someone. I said, I don't know. So I don't understand online world. A couple of years, just getting the hang of things. So I said it's so clearly demarcated. Right wing, left wing, and so where does that put me? So he asked me, you're writing about, you like Indian culture? I said, of course I love. I'm proud of it. And I'm presenting it in the way, and I want the world to notice. Right winger. I said, wow, does that make me right winger? I mean, but that's how the level has gone down to. I mean, it's true to that kind
very pseudo, and hypocrisy rules the roast. And therefore they want, all these things are very cliched. They want, you have this format. You have to have this trait if you're a fashion designer. You have to have this trait if you have to be popular. This trait and this character if you have to be. And if you try to break out of that and come, oh, no, you should not do that. They're so fixed and so orthodox in their approach. And shockingly, they call themselves liberal.
Like you said, that's an oxymoron. That's
And so well, and I really look forward to this Rangrekha, and you brought out the Partha Institute, and all these things are really worth reviving.
That was, I think, I'll just speak a little bit about it. That was very close to his heart. So for him, storytelling. So I am a storyteller. I don't call myself a writer. I call myself a storyteller. And every institute, wherever I go, especially in colleges that I go to, is the first thing I ask, what do you realize the moment I say stories? And invariably, most of the people say, oh, entertainment, oh, fun, oh. I said, really? I mean, try to understand that. All the greatest spiritual masters in this world who walked on this world told stories. I don't think they were entertaining anyone. None of them were entertaining anyone. All these stories and anecdotes and parables had something, and they realized that these listeners will take away the nuggets much better in the stories than if I were to give down in a sermon. So it's very clear that stories, and since time immemorial, that is something which Mr. Pai understood it clearly. So he was a teacher at heart. He was somebody who wanted to dispel this knowledge. It's not that he wanted to create something. Why else do you think he was so fastidious about the language? He was so particular about the illustration style, so particular that this should go, that shouldn't. It comes only from the point of view of the child who is going to read. That's something that people have not acknowledged enough. They looked at the fact, oh, he's given great stories, he's a great marketer, and all that thing is great. But deep down is the fact that he wanted to actually educate the little kids in a certain way. And that is something that goes without saying. And Amar Chitraguta has done that, no matter what you say.
I would definitely say it was also entertaining and a lot of comedy inside it. You look at the comic Malavika, you look at the Jester Vasantaka, you look at Tenali Ramakrishna, Birbal, So many characters where there was a
Yes,
lot of humor which was involved.
exactly. But how do you say a serious thing in let's say a comical fashion, which resonates? So the comic remains while you're enjoying it, but people might not realize subconsciously they have understood what the message was. That's
Absolutely.
that's the beauty of a story is. That's the beauty of a story. And I realize as a storyteller, I can empathize and understand where what Mr. Pai stood for. And the fact that stories are much more than what people are just perceiving. They might perceive on a conscious level at a certain thing. That's a limited thing. Conscious levels are always very limited. It's a mind play. It's a limitation. But subconsciously, it goes much beyond. Why else, again, coming back to why else does it resonate 50 years after the first issue came? Why else does it resonate 3 generations down the line, 4 generations down the line, when the entire idiom of storytelling has changed? Entire. Everything has changed. Today, the storytelling idiom has changed. The medium has changed. Idiom has changed. Everything has changed. Yet, Amar Chitrakatha still resonates at any corner of the world. Why is it?
Anywhere.
Yeah. So I think that's where the greatness lies, and that's something we must acknowledge. There's no point finding out. Obviously, as humans, to err as human, he has his shortfalls. Of course, we all have our shortfalls. I mean, he's not a superhuman, and nobody should be portraying him as superhuman. But the fact is, he did the job which is much more than just ordinary mortals did. We must at least acknowledge. I mean, if not,
With complete dedication.
he did, and for years to
And
come.
speaking about the loneliness that his wife felt, how
Hmm.
his long working hours made life difficult for everybody at home,
Yes,
and the kind of commit. And sometimes I think he perhaps out of too much of involvement, he became temperamental.
he did. He
And
did all of that, and there are stories galore of that. And I think in the book as well, I mentioned that he's actually torn illustrations and all. He's done all these things. We humans, we do all kinds of things. Like it's not that we don't do that, but there's certain thing. It's like I always keep saying that when we while playing in life, it's a kind of philosophy that I keep telling younger ones. In school we used to play this game. There's this: you draw a small line and say, "Don't touch this line," and shorten it. We used to do that. You recall, So what do? You draw a bigger line. As simple as that. That's how
true,
the
true.
philosophy. That's the philosophy that you realize. And to him, we must understand that he had a bigger line, and much bigger line than the smaller line that we keep harping on. So-called critics are harping on.
I suppose he just kept drawing lines which were getting bigger, 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 and bigger over time.
Such a huge thing. I mean, if one thing I spoke to a critic. He was panning. I said, very good. You have a right to say all these things. But the fact of the matter that you're still discussing him proves a point what I'm saying. And that is resonating. Boss, you're talking in today in the new millennium about a man who created something 50 years ago. And you're still talking about it, still so passionately. That means it has some amount of value addition to it. Whether you like it or not is a different matter. We will talk about it later. But the fact is, it still resonates with a certain amount of value. That's your harping about it, talking about it now validates that. As simple as that. I said end of story. So that's, yeah.
No, he is like the modern day Vyasa.
It is. It is. And
or Sota Puranika or Vaishampayana, somebody like that.
Exactly.
Who's given us everything once again.
It is. It is. So that's.
I'm so glad and happy that I got an opportunity to read this book and recall all my childhood days and all these titles, like Swami Dayananda, where he holds on to the wheel of the vehicle which is moving, or the story of Shankar Deva in Assam, or Rana Pratap, Rana Sangha, Rana Kumbha, Veer Hamir, Bappa Rawal. 5 Rajput kings I can remember by the drop of a hat.
It's only because of Pai.
Because of Pai, not my history book.
No, of course not. I don't remember a single thing from a history book.
No Jahan, no chance.
So So he did,
So,
like the ACK quiz that happened, which allowed them to get into schools in 1975. That's where he said no, and they were taking the ACK titles which were there in the history textbook, and the kids who read from ACK books, Amar Chitra Katha, were answering better than those who read from
I saw
the
that. I saw that.
PS. And that opened the floodgates. That there are like gates for all the schools, and they suddenly realized that yes, it is not something which is to be taken lightly. So yeah, I think he's gone through his. I think we have to accept that there will be brickbats. I think we should be happy about brickbats as well. It's
No,
more
no,
something.
otherwise, there's no way that we would have understood the meaning for
Yeah,
Alam
of
Pana
course,
or Jahan Pana
yeah,
or
yeah,
Alamgir.
of course.
you know, nothing of that sort. And also, we would never know who the father of Kamsa was.
Yeah,
Ugrasen.
yeah.
When Krishna takes the crown and gives it to Ugrasen,
And yeah,
my
that's why.
lord, it belongs to you, it is rightfully yours. That little boy giving the
Yeah,
crown to the grandfather.
yeah, exactly. Hmm.
And the butter pot is kept so high. I'm a little child. My hands are so small. How will I reach it?
Yeah.
All those pranks.
Hmm.
It just comes in front of your eyes. In
Exactly.
fact, I still have about 100 titles at home.
Oh,
But I'm able to recall every picture, every frame better than my any other subject.
it is, and that's where the beauty lies. That's where years of work of the artists and the script writers, the dialogue writers, and colorists, all of them has gone through exhaustive work. Look at the kind of
Absolutely.
color schemes and all. Even in 70s today, it's still relevant. Again, time and again, why I'm saying this is still relevant is in a even though they touch it up and make it look better for digital presentation and all, but they're still using the same images which are still looking very attractive today. What is that? What makes that? So it's there's an entire set of lithographs that could be created around, which we tried doing that. We unfortunately didn't do it while I was in ACK. Is
I
that
suppose you could do calendars with these titles.
yeah, we could have.
So where you have the birth month and you have
We
the
were in
date,
fact thinking about creating proper paintings, lithographs which is
which can
very
decorate living rooms and the
very
streets.
popular in the West, which could be done. Something on those lines. Perhaps ACK today can look into that in the future.
Absolutely.
That's
In fact,
something.
while I'm just talking to you as we wind up, I must tell you this that some years ago there was, the Hindu newspaper used to carry a column called the Personality of the Week.
Hmm.
And Mr. G. Satyamurthy, the then Chief of Bureau of Western Tamil Nadu,
Hmm.
had wanted to do a story on me.
Okay.
I said there's nothing much that I've done except write short stories connected with Coimbatore and small time local history stuff.
Hmm.
He
Hmm.
still insisted, and then he summarily called me over to the Hindu office, and I went there. Then he asked me, "Where did you get this inspiration?" If I'm not mistaken, it is in that article. Normally, it is put on the city's page, but this was put in the state page within the next 2 or 3 days, where I
Hmm.
have made a mention of Amar Chitra Katha
Oh wow.
as the thing which inspired me.
Hmm. That
So
is.
I'm sure there must be millions like me.
Of course they are. Of course they are. All of us do. I mean, you like, but I've realized while I wrote this and trying to get in touch with people living at nook and cranny around this world, these people, and suddenly all saying, "Oh yeah, they got these Amar stories." Especially when I write about the first one, in my author note, I have a million stories to tell. I'm sure million people have more millions of stories to tell about what they did with their book. They bound them together. How did they exchange? Did that flick each other's titles, trying to inflate their own collection? The entire growing up. I mean,
No, it is like, if the two kids at home, they fight over the ownership. Like me
exactly.
and my brother. My
Yeah,
brother never read, but I was the one who was reading it. My mother wanted to sort this out. Rajesh, Suresh, there are two brothers. So I insisted, I told my mom that my name should be there on the book. She said, nothing doing, it should be common property. So in each of the books, G. Aravinda Kumari, that's the name of my mother. She would write it and keep so that we will not fight over it.
Fight over it. Okay.
And
Wow.
I just simply forgot to show the cover.
Oh,
it relates to the chapter that you've written about the ownership of this book.
Oh,
All
well,
of these books.
yeah. There's so many things. It brings back such golden memories. So I think we have to thank Mr. Pai for that.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Rajesh ji, for giving us the opportunity to know more about him.
Yeah.
And looking forward to read all your other books and
Please,
to want to have a larger interaction with some of the other books with you sometime in the near future.
love to. Thank you.
I wish you Godspeed in all your endeavors. And the Verandah Club team thanks you, and we are most grateful to you for giving us this opportunity to discuss about this very iconic man who continues to live and will continue to live in all our hearts and the hearts of everybody else also.
We'll have to make sure that he does.
You have made the beginning and it will continue.
Yeah,
so,
it will. It's especially audiovisual thing coming up. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of that happening around Uncle Pai.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Great day. Great evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.